My sister told the whole family. Our father was dead. He was sitting across the table from me, blowing on his coffee. That's the lie I want to talk about. Not the small kind people tell to be gentle, but the kind built to move a house out from under a man before he's even cold. My name's Caleb. I'm a title examiner, and reading dead men's paperwork for a living is exactly why she thought she could get away with it. 12 days before a funeral nobody needed, Renata called crying that Dad had gone in his sleep, the house he still legally owned, the one she wanted signed over, before a death certificate that didn't exist could even dry, was the only thing actually at risk. Dad heard the voicemail. He didn't say a word. He just reached for the pot and poured 2 cups. "She used my voice," he said, sliding one mug toward me. "Listen," I hit play again anyway. Phone flat on the table, between the sugar bowl and his reading glasses. Renata's voice came out thin and wet, the kind of crying that sounds rehearsed, if you've heard the real thing enough times to know the difference. "He's gone, Caleb. Early this morning. I need you to call me back before you talk to anyone else about the house." "Before I talk to anyone else about the house," I repeated. "Not before I grieve. Before the house." Dad's mouth did something. That wasn't a smile. "That's your sister. Efficient." He didn't look dead. He looked like a 71-year-old man in a cardigan, irritated that his coffee wasn't hot enough, which was somehow worse than if he'd looked frail. Nothing about him needed explaining, and nothing about him needed defending. Not to me. Not that morning. I just needed to decide what to do with a voicemail that had already started moving through people who loved him. "You're going to let her keep believing it," I said. "Not a question. For now," Dad said. "Let's see how fast she moves." That was the whole plan, as far as I understood it that morning. 2 men and 2 cups of coffee, waiting to see how fast grief could be weaponized into paperwork. I didn't know yet how far it had already gone. I didn't know about the notary. I didn't know Renata had been rehearsing this exact voicemail in one form or another for the better part of a year. "You're serious," said a voice from the doorway I hadn't heard open. Marcus, my sister's husband of 6 years, letting himself in the way he always did, like the spare key made him family, in a way marriage apparently hadn't quite finished doing. He stopped when he saw Dad at the table. His face did 3 things in under 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and then something that tried very hard to look like relief. "Everett," Marcus said. "God, we thought." "I know what you thought," Dad said, not unkindly, and pushed the 3rd mug toward the empty chair, like he'd been expecting a 3rd guest all along. Marcus didn't sit. He stood there holding his own phone like it might ring and save him. And for a second, none of us said anything, and the silence did more work than any accusation could have. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without the 6 months before it. Not explained all at once, because Dad hated when people explained things all at once. Said it was how con men and insurance adjusters talked. He liked things told the way they happened, in pieces, at the speed a person could actually use them. It started with a fall, not a dramatic one. Dad slipping on the porch steps in March, cracking a hip, 3 weeks in a rehab facility that smelled like bleach and canned peaches. Renata drove down from 2 hours away every other day, which surprised me, because Renata and I had spent our whole adult lives politely not driving anywhere for each other. "You could help more," she told me, in the rehab parking lot, arms crossed against the cold, instead of just auditing everything from a distance. "I read title records for a living, Ren. I don't audit families." "You know what I mean." I did know what she meant, and I let it go, because grief makes people say things they'd normally sit on, and I told myself, that's all this was. Dad came home in April. Renata started managing his mail, Then his pharmacy calls. Then, without anyone quite agreeing to it, his bank. He asked me to, she said, the one time I brought it up. He can't be running to the branch every week at his age. He walked in on his own 2 weeks ago and asked for extra checks, I said. He gets confused sometimes. I didn't push, because I didn't have proof of anything. Just a feeling. The kind you get when a sentence sounds rehearsed, even the first time you hear it. That feeling sat in me for months, quiet, filed away. The way I file everything, a small irregularity in an otherwise clean record, the sort of thing that means nothing until it means everything. Then, in May, at work, I pulled a routine chain of title search for a house 2 streets over from Dad's, unrelated case, different family entirely, and found a power of attorney filed with the county that made me stop, chewing my sandwich mid-bite. Not because it was Dad's name, because the notary block belonged to a woman named Denise Pruitt, and I recognized the stamp number from somewhere I couldn't place until I got home that night and dug through the folder of Dad's paperwork he kept in the hall closet, the one with his deed and his old truck title and 40 years of tax returns. There it was, a durable power of attorney, dated the second week of April, notarized by Denise Pruitt, granting Renata full authority over his financial and property decisions. Dad had never mentioned it. I called him instead of texting. Because some things you don't put in writing until you know what they're going to become. Dad, did you sign a power of attorney in April? A pause long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum on his end of the line. No, he said. I signed something in March, in the hospital. Painkillers, hip surgery. I don't remember half that week. Renata brought papers for the insurance. This isn't insurance. This is full authority. Financial and property both. Another pause. Bring it Sunday, he said, and don't tell your sister you found it. That Sunday was the coffee. That's where the voicemail landed, right in the middle of a conversation we hadn't finished having, about a document neither of us had agreed to. Dad's plan, once he laid it out, wasn't complicated, which was exactly the kind of plan he trusted. The fewer moving parts, the fewer places for someone else's lie to hide inside it. He wasn't going to correct anyone, he was going to let the story run, and watch who moved first, and toward what. You understand this could get worse before it gets better, I said. Things people build on lies always feel sturdy. Right up until they don't, Dad said. And that was the last time either of us tried to summarize it, because 2 days later, Renata called again. And this time she wasn't crying. The funeral home needs a decision by Wednesday, she said, when I picked up. And Caleb, I found something in Dad's files. A handwritten note about the house. It's not a real will, it's just a note. But I think it's close enough to what he wanted. And if we get it formalized fast, we can avoid probate dragging out for a year. Formalized. How? Gary's going to help. You remember Gary? Worked with Dad at the plant, notary now, does this kind of thing all the time. I didn't remember a Gary who was a notary. But I let the sentence sit, because a name and a job in the same breath was exactly the kind of detail Renata was good at supplying when she needed you to relax into it. Gary Odom, it turned out, a heavy-set man with a laugh like a door hinge, Dad's old shift supervisor 30 years back. The kind of family friend who shows up at every funeral, whether he's close to the deceased or not. And apparently the kind who'll notarize whatever's put in front of him, if the person asking has known him 30 years and calls him family. Send me the note, I said, before Gary touches anything. It's not that dramatic, Caleb. Send it. Anyway, she did, eventually, 3 days later. A photo of a half-page in handwriting that was almost Dad's, but not quite. The T's crossed with a flourish he'd never used. In 40 years of grocery lists and birthday cards I still had in a drawer. It read like a will and signed like a signature, and it left the house in its entirety to Renata for her care and sacrifice. I sat with that photo open on my laptop for a long time, next to a scanned copy of his actual signature from the deed. And something in my chest went very cold and very still, the way it does, right before you understand you're not looking at a mistake anymore. You're looking at a decision someone made on purpose. I drove to Dad's that night without calling first. "She's moving faster than I thought," I told him, laying both signatures side by side on the kitchen table under the overhead light. "Look at the T's." He put his glasses on and looked for a long time. "That's not my hand," he said. Quiet, not shocked, just certain. The way you're certain about the shape of your own name. There's a notary attached. Gary Odom. She wants to formalize it this week. Formalize a note I never wrote into a document I never signed, witnessed by a man I haven't spoken to in 15 years. Dad set the photo down carefully, like it might still be evidence of something worth preserving exactly as it was. All right. All right. What? All right. Let's let them formalize it. I stared at him. "You want to let this happen?" "I want to let this happen in front of people," he said. "There's a difference between catching your daughter in a lie and watching her read it out loud to a room full of witnesses she picked herself. One of those, she can talk her way out of. The other one, she can't." That was the moment the shape of the whole thing changed for me. Not a plan to stop a fraud before it started, but a plan to let it finish, on a stage Renata built herself, with an audience she'd chosen, because she thought they were safe. I didn't love it. I told him so. He poured more coffee and didn't argue, just let the silence do what it always did with him, which was outlast me. Renata called me twice that week, and both times I let it go to voicemail first, just to hear what she'd say, when she thought no one was actually listening yet. "Caleb, call me back. I need you on board with this before Sunday. It'll go faster if it's not contested, and I don't want this getting messy for either of us." I called her back the second time, because letting a lie run unchallenged for too long starts to feel like agreeing with it. "Define messy," I said. "You know what I mean. Lawyers, delays. Dad wouldn't have wanted his estate tied up for a year over paperwork." "Funny," I said. "He seemed pretty attached to his paperwork the last time I checked." There was a pause on her end, brief, the kind that tells you a person is recalculating how much you actually know. "This isn't about the house, Caleb. This is about me finally getting something. For 3 months of my life, I gave up driving down here." "Then ask him for it," I said, out loud, while he's alive to say yes or no. "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple," I said. "You're just not sure what the answer would be." She hung up without saying goodbye, which told me more than anything she'd said on the call, and I sat there afterward turning the folder over in my hands, thinking about how certainty in a voice can be manufactured, the same way a signature can, close enough to the real thing that most people never think to check. "There's still the medical records," I said finally. "If Gary's going to notarize a will supposedly signed the week you were in rehab, I want proof of exactly where you were and what you were doing that week. Times, dates, therapy sessions, something that can't be argued with." Dad nodded slowly, and for the first time that night, something like approval crossed his face. "Now you sound like your job," he said. I spent the next several days doing exactly that, quietly, the way I pull any chain of title: pharmacy pickup logs, physical therapy sign-in sheets, a nurse's note time-stamped the same afternoon the note was supposedly written in his own kitchen, 40 miles away from where he actually was. Every piece of it agreed with itself, and none of it agreed with the story Renata was building. I didn't send any of it to her. I didn't send it to Gary. I just kept it in a folder. The way you keep anything you're not ready to use yet. And I waited for the invitation I already knew was coming. It came on a Thursday. Renata's text was almost cheerful. Sunday, 2 p.m., at the house. Gary's coming to finalize things properly. Make it official for everyone. Family only. Please come, Caleb. I don't want this to be something that divides us. I read that line 4 times. I don't want this to be something that divides us. As if the dividing had happened somewhere off to the side of her, whether she hadn't caused, rather than a document with a stranger's handwriting sitting in a folder on my laptop, with her name at the bottom of every decision. I texted back that I'd be there. I didn't say Dad would be too. Some things you let a person find out at the moment they're least prepared for it, because that's usually the only moment honest enough to matter. Sunday came gray and warm, the kind of early summer heat that makes a house feel smaller than it is. I got there 20 minutes early and found Dad already parked 2 streets over, engine off, watching the driveway like he was casing his own home. We hadn't planned that part. He just showed up, said he wanted to see who arrived and in what order, said something about how people's punctuality tells you more about their guilt than their words ever will. "You're supposed to be dead," I said through his rolled-down window. "I'm early," he said. "Dead men keep terrible schedules." By 2 o'clock, the living room held 6 people and 1 folded card table someone had set up like it was a courtroom. Renata, upright on the couch in a blazer she never wore around the house. Marcus beside her, jaw tight, phone finally put away. Gary Odom, red-faced and sweating slightly in a suit that hadn't fit him in a decade. A leather folder in his lap like he was auditioning for a role he hadn't read the whole script for. And 2 of Dad's old neighbors, the Hendersons, who Renata had apparently invited as witnesses to the reading. A phrase that told me exactly how far she'd thought this through, and exactly how little she understood. What a witness actually protects you from. I sat in the armchair by the window, close enough to the front door, that I'd hear it open before anyone else did. "Thank you all for coming," Renata said, hands folded, voice doing the practiced soft thing it had done on the voicemail. "I know this is hard. Dad wouldn't have wanted us to drag this out." She looked at Gary. "Go ahead." Gary cleared his throat, opened the folder, and started reading in the flat, over-careful voice of a man performing seriousness he hadn't quite earned. "I, Everett Talbot, being of sound mind, do hereby leave my property at 214 Larkspur to my daughter Renata, in recognition of her—" "Stop," I said. Every head in the room turned. Renata's face did the same 3-part sequence Marcus's had that morning at the coffee table. Surprise, calculation, and something reaching for relief that had nowhere to land yet. "Caleb, please," she said. "Not now. You want witnesses," I said. "So let's actually witness something." I set the folder on the card table, open to the page comparing Dad's real signature against the one on her note. "This isn't Dad's handwriting. You know it isn't, because you've seen his handwriting your whole life, same as I have. And this document is dated the week he was in rehab, 40 miles from this house, on painkillers, signing intake forms with a nurse standing over him. I have the sign-in logs, the pharmacy pickups, the therapy notes, all time-stamped the exact hours this note claims he was sitting at that kitchen table writing it out. You went digging through his medical records." Renata's voice climbed, sharp now, all the softness gone out of it at once. "That's not your business, Caleb. That's not. It became my business, the day you had a stranger notarize a house out from under him." "Now hold on," Gary said, folder still open on his knees, sweat darker at his collar. "I notarized a signature. Renata told me it was already signed. She just needed it made official. Said her father was too unwell to travel for it." "He wasn't unwell that week," I said. "He was in physical therapy, 40 miles away, learning to walk again on a hip he broke, falling down his own porch steps. While you were telling Gary he was too fragile to leave a room, he wasn't even in. Mrs. Henderson, on the love seat, had gone very still. The particular stillness of a woman recalculating exactly what kind of afternoon she'd been invited to. Marcus wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking at the front door, and I understood, in that half-second, that he'd been dreading this exact moment longer than Renata had. That whatever this had started as, he'd known before I had, how badly it could end. "I want to see those records," Gary said, voice gone flat and cold, in a way that had nothing performed left in it. "Renata, I want to see them right now, because my name and my stamp are on that page, and if what he's saying is true, that's not a mistake I made. That's a mistake you asked me to make." "It's not what you think," Renata said, and for the first time, her voice cracked in a way that sounded less rehearsed and more like the ground actually going out from under her. "I was going to fix it. I was going to make it right once probate was done. I just needed time. The medical bills were—" The front door opened. I heard it before anyone else did, because I'd been listening for it the whole time. The particular sound of a key that had lived in that lock for 30 years, turning without hesitation. Dad walked in, still wearing his cardigan, holding the folded newspaper he'd apparently stopped to buy on the way, like a man arriving home from an ordinary errand, instead of the center of his own funeral. Nobody spoke. The Hendersons made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a cough. Gary's folder slid half off his knee, and he didn't move to catch it. Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped backward against the hardwood, and Renata just stared, mouth open on a word that never came out, her whole face doing the math of every voicemail, every note, every Sunday visit that had been building toward a moment she'd apparently never actually pictured happening. The moment the man in the story stopped being a story and became a person standing in his own doorway, watching. "Hi, Ren," Dad said. Quiet, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than shouting. "I hear you've had a busy month." "Dad," her voice broke fully now. No performance left in it at all. Just a woman watching every version of the last 30 days collapse into a single sentence. "Dad, I can explain. It wasn't— I was going to tell you. You told everyone else first," he said. "That's usually how it goes with a decision you're ashamed of. Everyone finds out, except the one person it actually belongs to." Gary was on his feet now too, folder clutched to his chest like it might protect him. "Everett, I swear to God, I didn't know that page wasn't yours. She told me you signed it in front of a hospice worker. She said you were too weak to—" "I believe you didn't know, Gary," Dad said, and something in his voice let the older man's shoulders drop half an inch. "I don't believe you checked." Nobody had an answer for that, and the silence that followed lasted long enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen, the same sound I'd heard on the phone weeks earlier. The small mechanical fact of an ordinary house going on being ordinary, while everything human inside it came apart. "The power of attorney's already revoked," I said, mostly to fill the space, mostly because someone needed to say the practical thing out loud, before the emotional thing swallowed the whole room. "Field with the county Tuesday." And the account freezes she put in place. Those reverse the second Dad walks into the branch and says he's alive, which, given the circumstances, shouldn't be hard to prove. "You knew," Renata said to me, and there was something almost like betrayal in it, as if I were the one who'd broken something between us, instead of documenting what already had. "This whole time, you knew, and you let me stand here and I let you do exactly what you were already doing," I said. "I just made sure it happened somewhere. It couldn't be undone with another lie." Mrs. Henderson stood, tugging her husband up by the sleeve, both of them murmuring something about needing to get going. the particular fast, apologetic exit of people who'd wandered into a family's worst afternoon by mistake and wanted no further part of the record. Nobody stopped them. Gary followed 2 minutes later, folder under his arm, stopping only to press Dad's hand between both of his and say something too low for me to catch, an apology or a promise. Maybe both, the kind of thing men say to each other when they've been made fools of by someone they trusted more than they should have. That left the four of us, Dad in the doorway still, like he hadn't decided yet whether he was staying, Marcus by the window, silent this whole time. In a way I was starting to understand wasn't innocence so much as exhaustion. Renata on the couch with her hands pressed flat against her knees, staring at nothing. And me, standing between all of it, with a folder of documents that had done exactly what I'd built it to do, and now felt like nothing at all. "Say something," Renata said finally, to Dad, not to me. He came the rest of the way into the room and sat down across from her, in the chair that had been his for 30 years. And for a long moment, he just looked at her the way you look at something you're trying to decide whether you still recognize. "I'm going to tell you what I told Caleb over coffee," he said. "Things people build on lies feel sturdy, right up until they don't. You built a lot in 1 month, Ren. A death, a note, a stranger's signature standing in for mine. I want to know why." "Because I was tired," she said, and it came out of her like something that had been dammed up a long time, ugly and fast. "Because I drove down every other day for 3 months, and Caleb sent flowers. Because you needed help, and I gave it. And nobody ever says thank you for the years, Dad. They just wait for the will to see who mattered. So you decided to write the ending yourself," Dad said. Not cruel, just plain. Instead of asking me, "Would you have said yes?" "I don't know," he said, and that honesty seemed to cost him something, sitting there with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold an hour ago. "You didn't give either of us the chance to find out." Marcus finally spoke, quiet, to the window rather than to any of us. "I told her it was a bad idea. In March. I told her." He looked at Renata like he was seeing the last 6 months of his marriage laid out on a table he hadn't agreed to sit at. "I should have told someone else too." "I didn't. That's on me." Nobody answered him. There wasn't a clean thing to say to a man admitting he'd known and stayed quiet. The way there wasn't a clean thing to say to any of it. And I understood, standing there in a living room that smelled like my whole childhood, that the story wasn't going to end with anyone arrested or anyone forgiven completely. That it was going to end the way most real family failures do, with paperwork corrected, accounts reopened, and a silence at Thanksgiving that would take longer to fix than any signature ever could. Dad didn't call the police that week or the week after. He talked to a lawyer about the forged document, mostly to make sure the county filing was permanently voided, and decided, in the end, not to press charges against his own daughter. A decision I disagreed with and told him so twice, and both times he said the same thing. That some debts you collect in court, and some you just carry. And he'd rather carry this one, and see, over the next few years, whether Renata became someone who paid it back on her own. She hasn't yet, not fully. She comes to Sunday coffee sometimes now, sits across from him, with her hands wrapped around a mug, and they talk about nothing. The porch steps he finally had repaired, a neighbor's dog, whether the peonies are coming back this year. The way people talk, when the real conversation is still sitting underneath everything, unspoken, waiting for somebody to be ready. Marcus doesn't come anymore. Last I heard, he'd moved into an apartment across town, and Renata hadn't said whether that was temporary. Dad still has the house. His name's still the only one on the deed, exactly where it's supposed to be. And every so often, I catch him standing in the kitchen doorway, just looking at the room like he's checking it's still real, still his, still not something written by somebody else's hand. I think that's the part that stays with him longest. Not that she tried to take it, but that for a few weeks, on paper, in a stranger's careful cursive, he'd already lost it and hadn't even known. He asked me once, months later, pouring 2 cups the way he always does, whether I thought Renata would ever just say she was sorry, plainly, without the excuses folded in around it. I told him I didn't know. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected, and neither of us said anything else about it, and the coffee, for once, didn't have time to go cold before we drank it. I still pull chain of title searches for a living, still spend my days matching signatures against signatures, dates against dates, one small irregularity at a time. Most of what I find means nothing. A clerical error, a name misspelled twice the same wrong way. The ordinary sloppiness of paperwork, nobody expected anyone to check that closely. But every so often, I'll come across a power of attorney, filed a little too fast, a will notarized by someone who has no earthly reason to know the person who signed it. And I'll think about Gary's folder sliding off his knee, about the particular sound Renata's voice made when the front door opened behind her. People assume forgery is the hard part. It isn't. The hard part is finding someone willing to stand in a room and read it out loud, believing the story will hold up as long as nobody in the audience thinks to ask a second question. Dad understood that before I did. He didn't need to prove Renata was capable of lying. He already knew that, the way any parent eventually learns exactly what their children are capable of. What he needed was for her to prove it herself, in front of people who couldn't later pretend they hadn't heard it. The house is quiet most days now. He waters the peonies himself, refuses the cane the physical therapist recommended, still drinks his coffee too hot, and complains when it isn't. Once, driving away on a Sunday, I caught him in the rearview mirror standing on the porch he'd fallen down 8 months earlier, watching me go the way he used to watch Renata's car disappear around the corner when we were kids, like he was making sure whoever left came back the same as they'd left. I don't know if that particular kind of watching ever fully goes away once a family gives you a reason to start doing it. I don't know if it should.